Sorry for the slight delay. We're trying to get some participants in before we kick off, but I think we've got to kick off now to avoid delays and slippages in other sessions. Well, all our panelists are here, and let me use this opportunity to invite our panelists to the high table. And I just want to crave your indulgence that in spite of the fact that we haven't gotten the quorum of the conference participants, we will kick off. We will kick off. On the basis of this, may I invite Professor Oluwajekaye, who is the Executive Chairman of the African Center for Shared Development Capacity Building in Nigeria. You're welcome. Well, we all know Prof. Apart from being the former Director General of Nigerian Institute of Economic Research, Social and Economic Research, he was the Director of Research for the African Economic Research Consortium in Nairobi, and now he's retired but not tired. So you're welcome, Prof. Let me use this opportunity to call on Indibikubiwaya, Policy and Advocacy Advisor of the Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa, AGRA. It's a pleasure having you here. It's also a pleasure to introduce Dr. Moses Oboye-Luako, the Chief Economics International Trade Administration Commission of South Africa. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we've been talking about feeding Africa towards agro-allied industrialization for inclusive growth. We just want to underscore that the idea of industrialization, agro-allied industrialization, should not be seen as an end in itself. It's just a means. How do we use agro-allied industrialization to achieve concrete development objectives? And we have all heard about the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the SDGs, that says we must take all necessary actions to ensure that nobody is left behind by 2030. Meaning we have to address not only poverty, but inequalities. This morning's session is for us to really look at how we want to use agro-allied industrialization to deal with issues of inequality, reducing inequality through inclusive agro-allied industrialization. How do we ensure agro-allied industrialization is inclusive? And one of the things we try to do is that in the past, at now, the only thing we export in Africa is primary commodities. And what we know is that once you continue to export primary commodities, you export your jobs. And once your jobs are exported, you have destroyed one of the strategies of unleashing and economic well-being in terms of reducing inequality and reducing poverty. And on the basis of this, we have said, okay, we said agriculture employs about 60 to 70% of the African population. Now, and we all know that engagement in the industry and the manufacturing sector seems to be the one that creates some kind of high value, and at the same time, majority of decent incomes emanate from there. And that is one of the reasons why we said, okay, what can we do to ensure agro-allied industrialization as a means of accelerating income inequality reduction? And on the basis of this, we all know Africa is the second most unequal region in the world after Latin America. Which currently it has about 0.43 Gini relative to 0.39 Gini to all developing world. And as a result of this, one thing that is very clear in one of the publications that UNDP will be releasing in the next 2 or 3 months on inequality by vocation in Africa is that there are only 7 outlier countries in Africa whose Gini is between 0.55 and 0.65, including South Africa, Botswana, Namibia, Angola, Comoros, and Central African Republic. Once you remove these 7 countries, then the Gini for Africa remains one of the best in the world. It compares with what we have in Europe and the rest. So what do we need to do by using agro-allied industrialization to really dent that and at the same time accelerate progress on poverty reduction? And that is the essence of this particular discussion today. And we have invited our knowledgeable, respected people who have done a lot in the area of inequality, who have done a lot in the area of applied researches in agriculture as well as industrialization. And that's why we said, okay, let's listen to them to be able to give us some kind of food for thought in terms of moving forward on using agro-allied industrialization as a major strategy of denting inequality so that by 2030, nobody is left behind. May I use this opportunity to invite Professor Oluwajekai to open the discussion.
Great to be in company of great minds like Dr. Odusola. What I wanted to contribute this morning is the need to ensure that the challenges of the current pattern of production, export, and engagement with the global economy, which is, as he has mentioned, put us at the uncomfortable end of the spectrum of inequality at the global level, like he has rightly mentioned. Apart from Latin America, Africa is the next, most unequal continent in the world. That is the result of our current engagement with the global community by exporting crude materials. Now, if we are going to industrialize, the primary purpose of that is to then change our pattern of engagement with the global, economy by at least adding value to what we, currently export before we now export or use locally, which is to replace imports and export processed or higher value-added goods and services. Now, the pattern of distribution of the benefits of that process should be of interest to us. Otherwise, we can perpetuate the pattern of inequality that we have now, even when we industrialize, which means that along the value chain, we have to pay attention to the possibility of using the mechanism of, the value chain management to then internally skew income distribution in the following sense. If the farmer who produces this, primary products, instead of exporting them, send them to local processors. Local processors add value, and they then make them available to the domestic market and or to the export market, and they earn higher income. It is quite possible that the primary producers will still be at the short end of the process. So the question is, what should we do to prevent that? Which means by the nature of the value chain, the managers or the controllers of the system in the primary production line, they are the processors, because they determine, what they will pay to the farmer, and they also have the privilege of, after transforming, after processing and increasing the shelf lives of this primary produce, they can therefore manage the releases to the global market or to the domestic market so as to earn higher income. How do we then govern the system to ensure that the farmers who are producing this primary produce don't remain, at the same level as they are now after we have industrialized? I think that's a challenge. And in that regard, I think the state has a role to play in bridging the information asymmetry that could be exploited by the advantaged group, which is the processors, the manufacturers, and the other higher value added operators in the system, and therefore ensure that the farmer's interest is protected. What kind of mechanism should we put in place by the state to ensure that we govern that process very well? My own feeling is that, like I said, information asymmetry is a major challenge. So the state should actually be there to actually break that problem of information asymmetry, which can be exploited by the processors and manufacturers. Secondly, I think the state also has a role in ensuring that the tax system, all right, is organized in such a way that the higher value adding operators are progressively taxed, and then the proceeds of that, they are used to address certain structural and human development challenges that the rural communities have, mainly in the context of using a reasonable proportion of the tax revenue that they realize from the processors and manufacturers to then provide human development initiatives to the rural area for two reasons. First, when you have proper investment in people in the context of health and education, you are making the current producers able to actually engage with the processors on almost equal terms, on the basis of capability to negotiate, capability to appreciate, capability to defend their interests. That's one. But importantly, the next generation of processors, of farmers and operators in the value chain will also be children and offsprings of the farmers, so that you then see that the same household, we have operators on the farm as a member, operators in the manufacturing or value adding processes of the value chain, so that they will capture the if you like quote unquote rent of ability and bring it home. But if you don't therefore capacitate the children of the farmers today, the children of the primary producers today, you then sentence them to perpetual poverty, because they are not able to have their own offsprings participate in the higher levels of the value chain. So I think government has a role in that regard. Now, the other angle I want us to also pay attention to is the fact that competitiveness of actors along the value chain should also receive attention. In particular, the very inclement production environment of the farmers, which we have been saying since the beginning of this conference. You have, everybody says there's a problem of poor infrastructure, but all of us are in Abuja. At least road-wise, Abuja is certainly an outlier in the country. And I'm sure it's the same in many of our countries. The cities, the headquarters, they are advantaged. The rural areas are severely disadvantaged. And that's where the primary producers are located. So you have a structural, a problem of putting them at a fundamental disadvantage in terms of actual, process of production, which means then that when they harvest their produce, even if you have capacitated them on how to handle, how to process, how to keep, their produce in almost wholesome state, ready for shipment to the processors, the fact that the infrastructural deficiencies are there, electricity, transportation, it then puts even the processors at some kind of a level of discomfort where they will then be telling the farmers that the trouble we have to take to get to you to collect this your produce is so that we cannot pay you more than this. Otherwise, keep your thing. And the farmer has produced, he's already stuck. The farmer has no opportunity to say, okay, go away, I will save my produce until the next person comes. It's not possible because the longer it stays, the greater the risk of its deterioration and loss of complete income. So the farmer is therefore constrained to say, okay, take it and give me whatever you can give me. So that also has a way of perpetuating inequality across space. So when we say invest in rural infrastructure, that is also a fundamental, approach to actually reducing the spatial inequality within our own countries. So those are the channels that I think, as we push the agenda for agro-industrialization process, let us pay attention to these two dimensions. Otherwise, when we succeed, we will have left these people behind, not only in the contemporary times, but also in the future, because of the fact that their children will be also sentenced to the same kind of discomfort that their parents have had to endure. So, in conclusion, at least now, my thought, therefore, is, in addition to very nice things that we have been saying, technology, ICT and all that, let us ensure that we pay attention to the spatial inequality that could be embedded in the way we pursue our, agro-industrialization on the continent. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Prof. You have touched on critical issues that we need to look into in making sure agro-allied industrialization dents inequality in Africa. And you touched on three things. One, issues relating to the states coming out in big bang to bridge the information asymmetry to deal with the middlemen, especially on the basis of what we have experienced in Ethiopia now, where through the commodity exchange, the middlemen are almost out of existence. Now, the issue of tax system is very important. In fact, there's hardly anything we can do about inequality anywhere in the world without a progressive tax system. And finally, the need for us to really invest heavily in rural infrastructure. And I think these are things we have to ponder upon later. Now, it's really a privilege to call Emin. So, and you want to use? Yeah. Oh, yes. Okay. Sorry, can you have the moving microphone?
Thank you so much for setting the stage, and thank you for everybody to come to this session. I will really try to give credit to my organization. That's why I prefer to do a PowerPoint presentation as I build on what Prof has just said. And what I'm trying to say is that addressing development is a very hard task. It's not a linear thing. You do one thing and you think you have fixed the whole system. It's so much complicated. You need to have strong leadership, good strategies, good policies, strategic partnerships. That's what I'm about to say in this presentation. So those were the questions given to us. But again, we are not alone. And we are not starting from crash. There are systems, there has been progress, as we've heard from yesterday and a day before yesterday. So it's building on those and fixing the little gaps or big gaps that are still there in the system. We've talked about the continental agenda, the leadership at all levels, country, Pan-African, international donors, private sector now coming in to support the agri sector. And we are saying this is the moment. We can't miss this moment. We not have any excuse in Africa, to be honest to you, if we lose this particular moment. So we've learned a lot in the past. We've learned from the gaps. We've learned from, whatever we've been doing right, but we have learned, and then we need to move on as we look at integrated approaches, not just standalone programs, but also knowing our strengths. We can't do everything, but there are people who can support us. Yeah. So, as I'm saying, there has been some progress. I won't, spend a lot of time in this. There has been progress. We can't ignore this progress happening. And we are building in this progress to actually bring agro-allied industrialization to build on different aspects. We have been developing technologies in having, for instance, high-yielding crops in Africa, availing them through research, but also applying all that research. And these graphs are showing how we are progressing on some crops I just selected in some countries across the continents. So you can see the trajectory. There is a progress. So we are building on this progress. In Africa, when you look at Ethiopia, Uganda, Ghana, Malawi, on the maize situation, you can see the trajectory. There are things to celebrate about, but also there are things we need to look at. Why did, for instance, Malawi go down after they have reached a certain trajectory on this continent? Why did the input subsidy system that didn't work? Or it worked, sorry to say so. It worked to a certain extent. So today we need to rethink. How do we redefine or readjust our different policies and programs to continue sustaining the momentum, what has been achieved? So the question is actually understanding our context, knowing what works, and see, are we at a level of sustaining or really starting, to boost the yield growing? And then sustaining the industry or adding value. But before you go there, you need to feed your people. Do we have food security in our countries? And how do you address food security? What system do you need to put in place? Yields, crops, fertilizers, other inputs, policies, and so on. So Ethiopia is a very great example, as you can see. Many others as well. Uganda as well. So I think we have things to learn from. Rwanda, I think you can see what has been happening. This was really made possible by what they called crop intensification program. It was nothing else other than to avail inputs, having strategy, avail inputs, seeds, fertilizers, other inputs in the country, and push for the extension services to make things that are happening in the country. So leadership is very key. Rwanda was the first country among the first to sign up the CADEP. At least, so far today, Rwanda has been able to sustain the growth to not less than 6%. And they have an ambition to 8.5% in the next few years. So it's good to have the leadership. And the leadership comes from strategies and policies. That's something we need to emphasize. I know Rwanda, it's my neighbor. I'm from Burundi. I wish my country can learn from Rwanda. So we are there to learn from each other. Then on fertilizer, you all know the Abuja thing. We are supposed to be using 50 kg per hectare, but you can see what is happening Africa compared to the rest of the globe. Of course, we are talking about environmental friendly usage of it. I'm not, advocating for overusing it, to knowing our context. AGRA, it has that mission. AGRA actually as an organization which is trying to to address these things, to contribute, not addressing, we can't address, to contributing to address these things. We believe that if we you are able to partner with other organizations who can increase some incomes from a number of, farmers. We are farmer-centered. That's the only way you can address inequalities. How many women do we have on the farm? How many women are considered in this area? And youth. Yesterday we were talking about youth. So it's really to know what is your tipping point. Where are we going? Where do you start from? What are your potential? And how do you raise or release or help those people who are marginalized on the continent or in the sector to come up, so that they get the gains of the different vision we have. So basically, I think that's what I have said. I would love you to pay attention to that slide. So as I said, it's so much complicated, but it can be done. It's only knowing that there are certain level. What do you need to address at farm level, for instance, and system level, financial, market, value addition, market linkages, and so on, and policies, government, donors, and others. So this is what I was talking about. If you look at the trajectory or what you want to achieve, there is I think you are economists. You can understand much better. I'm a lawyer. So when you reach that optimal intervention period, then you start thinking of sustaining. You start thinking of how do I move from agri subsistence to industry, and then to services. That kind of things you think of as you develop your strategy. Farm level, as I'm saying, how do we help farmers adopting technologies, appropriate technologies, and selling surpluses, having yields increasing, then selling surpluses, having access to markets, and so on. And they start growing into big entrepreneur. This is key. We can't do it all. Agra is only focusing on crop or on staple food. We are not in other exports, because we believe that this is what we need to feed Africa, and that's where we are. We have to focus, and many governments have actually selected priority crops or value chain they need to develop, and it's from there that different partnerships are formed in country, outside of the countries, from different industrialization. So that is very key, as you were saying, partnerships, knowing who is the good processor, how do I sell my product, how do I link my people to the financial institutions, to the, to exporters and so on. That's the whole process we are talking about. Voila. And this requires the whole system to function, as I said. It's about the whole system to function. Seed supply, fertilizer supply, farmer access to those technologies, capacity building, awareness, policy and advocacy, and many other things. Well, so this slide actually shows how do you start helping the farmer think business. How do you start helping the farmers think the system around him, and actually also going to other partners who, for instance, are building infrastructure, who are working in finance, so that the whole system is near the farm, the farmer level. It's a system level that needs to be put in place so that we reduce these inequalities. As we said, transport is another thing we see as inequality. Why should we have transport in urban area alone? And then farming is in rural areas. And you are saying Africa is, built on agric. There is a disconnect somewhere. Why should you why should you not target particular policies for women? And there are so many women on the continent doing agriculture sector. So there is a disconnect somewhere in the policy thinking. That needs to be fixed as much as we are concerned. So this shows the farmers' organization, the farmers coming together, forming organization to become strong, both in terms of production, but also in terms of increasing their voices. Voices in what they need, in the planning strategies. It's only when their thinking, their needs are put on the paper that we are able to do investment plans that can attract an investor. So it's a whole system. and it requires all of us to work together. And then they connect to the companies, processing, and so on. Those are just examples. The same thing I want. And this really shows how do you move from strategy to strategy. Yeah? So you have done this. How do you move to the next level to sustaining? How do you build transition markets or interventions to sustain your market? It's not something you start, you stop. You're continuing, building on those different transition markets. That's just an example of PPP model. And this is very critical. As you can see, many actors throughout the value chain, they are on this slide. How do you organize each? How do you invest in each to ensure, let's start from one. To ensure the farmers, where they have access to finance, to local traders, to extension services, and then it's a thing, it's a cycle. You understand? This is what we need actually. I actually could even stop here if you want. This is so much critical. I could have said everything throughout this slide, but it requires us to think through actually how do we reduce inequalities through this. It's a good model. Exactly. So same. These were what I'm saying now. So honestly, it's a good strategy. But are we really thinking of inequalities in that one? Yes. But we may not. Yeah? We may not be thinking of inequalities. We may not be thinking of distributing of wealth after we have, increased everything. We may not be thinking of different cultural barriers that are bringing women back, and also kind of crops, investment, women, youth, or technologies we'll be interested in as we address inequalities into the agro-allied industrialization. We may not be thinking of land issues, for instance. Land is a big issue in Africa. Everywhere, I think, but Africa is just a great example to talk about in terms of land access, land ownership by women, by youth, by private sector. There are certain things that needs land, and government has to take deliberate efforts to avail land to some people or to some investors when need be. So those are just examples. And of course, it requires capacity building. It requires taking the technologies down where they are supposed to be and being adopted. And when they are not adopted, rethinking of the strategy. How do I help these technologies and models to be adopted? Something I wanted to mention, I'm sure it's not among your talks here, but someone has just talked about social protection policies. Industry area is an area which I don't think people are thinking of social protection policy. When you look at women employed in the industry system, I think we've heard about the example of Egypt or elsewhere. How many women are protected from sexual-based violence? Some of them, I'm sure, nobody has talked about this throughout these 3 days here. So, but you can't ignore that. So many things are happening. Women, yes, they may be employed, but they're employed at the expense of their dignity. How do you protect women from this abuse? It's part of inequality. Get them be at the head at leadership level. Get them at least salaries which, bring some dignity. Bring protection policies within the industry. I mean, those are just examples, but they are needed to limit abuses. It is the same thing for youth. Those are just examples, what I said. We can do this through grant making, loans, whatever, de-risking the sector in many aspects. Thank you so much. I think I'm done.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This is quite scintillating, and I'm very sure it has added a lot of value to the discussion. And we note very, very copiously the importance of partnership, especially between the farm level, the market operators, as well as the public sector, in moving this trajectory in the right direction. And at the same time, it's very important for us to really facilitate farmers' access to finance, technology, and some other critical inputs that are very, very important for the transformation of the agricultural sector. And again, the issue of capacity building resonated quite prominently, and we need to really pay attention in those specific skills, especially the role of the service extension workers in making sure that our farmers are able to adopt the technology, even use fertilizers appropriately to make sure we are not contributing to the climate change. Again, you mentioned the importance of post-harvest management, social protection, the need to give particular attention and targeting to youth and women. This is very important in making sure that we use agro-allied industrialization to really to end poverty and reduce inequality by 2030. Thank you very much. Now it's time to call on Moses to give us his perspective. You want to do it from there, or you want to come here? Okay, that's fine.
Thank you for your kind introduction, Chair. I also want to use this opportunity to thank the organizers, particularly the UNDP, for honoring me to be here. I also want to thank the first presenter and the second presenter for making my job a bit easier, because you've touched on some on things that I'm going to say. Having said that, let me start off by saying that inequality in Africa is reinforced by the continued dual nature of agriculture in the region. On the one hand, you have a few large-scale producers or a few large-scale farmers with a large portion of land adopting the most technological advanced method of production. On the other hand, you have a very large small-scale farmers with small portion of land, lacking adequate infrastructure and institutional support, with low income and poor resource based, mostly dominated by women in the rural areas. I'm saying, until we're able to come up with a more strategic and pragmatic approach to graduate the majority of these small-scale farmers into commercial farmers, we will not be able to achieve inclusive agro-allied industrialization in Africa. But how can this be achieved? We need to boost technology and innovation. Technology change and innovation are inherently part of a structural economic transformation process that Africa has to go through. Unfortunately, it's still slow. How can we fast-track that? There is need to form a tripartite platform among government, the institution of higher learning, and firms to boost innovation. African countries should consider building an institution to develop skills and solve problems for a small number of agricultural products in which they have comparative advantage. I'm not talking about large agricultural products or few agricultural products in which they don't have comparative advantage. The institute should partner with the private producers and work with them to solve their problems. This was successfully used in Japan. It was also successfully used in South Africa in wine industry. Today, South Africa is the 8th largest producer of wine. You won't believe it. Export rose from 20 liters in 1992 to 1.2 billion liters in 2014. Another approach to boost technology and innovation is a cluster initiative. However, a review of agricultural clusters in Africa reveals that successful clusters are based on multifaceted innovation involving improvements in product quality, branding, use of reliable input supply, as well as effective distribution network and appropriate management system. Attracting foreign direct investment into agro-based manufacturing can also boost technology and innovation, but we shouldn't do so at the expense of local producers. because attracting foreign direct investment is not enough to benefiting from it. Policies should reflect on pronounced complementarity between attracting foreign direct investment and supporting the development of local firms' capabilities to take advantage of that. Apart from technology and innovation, we also faced with limited financial constraints and access to capital. A number of speakers have addressed this challenge in this conference. But permit me to say that while public sector investment in agriculture is important, the private sector ultimately drives activity and growth in agricultural development. And therefore, private sector-led innovative financing tools remain critical in improving access to capital in African agriculture. We've had a number of examples like mobile wallets in Nigeria, incentive-based risk-sharing system also in Nigeria, the Coffee Initiative for East Africa, just to mention but a few. On the issue of land, we need to be very careful here, and I'm saying this because of what is currently happening in South Africa. South Africa land reform was not based on agricultural production concerns, rather on restitution and the land tenure reform. Consequently, the cost of agricultural input has skyrocketed, shutting down a number of downstream producers in South Africa. So while government is trying to fix this in South Africa, we shouldn't allow this to be replicated in other African countries. On the issue of access to input and output markets, the importance of regional value chain cannot be overemphasized. The more we connect to the world, the better we should be able to connect to each other and develop the African factory. It cannot be that we enter into agreements with developed and emerging countries. As we do that, we disconnect from our neighbors. It cannot be. We also need to confront the truth that it costs less and is faster to import soy cake, for example, from Argentina to South Africa than from its neighbor, Zambia. Even though Zambia got comparative advantage in producing that, but it's still losing out because of poor logistics and industrial infrastructure. It costs less and is even faster to import goods from China to East Africa than from South Africa to East Africa. Let me stop here for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Moses. This is really great, and you have added substantial value to the discussion, especially in the area of graduating small farm holders into medium and larger scaled holders, which we think it's very important. Like we said earlier on, that it's difficult to just move all the small farmers with their cutlasses and hoe to become medium and large scale something overnight. It takes a while. And it has given us some kind of strategies we can put in place to really make sure this one happens. And again, the cluster initiative, that's really great. The most unfortunate part of it, many African countries have done this in the past. We allowed it to skip, and then we are going back into it. The cluster initiative is very, very important. I could remember in 1976, I worked in a farm something when I was in school, and then that's what they call farm settlement. Farm settlement with everything you need, everything. Tractors, fertilizers, everything is there, even the move bank to them. But now, the farmers are scattered everywhere without access to the inputs needed. And again, the need for us to really make sure we use foreign direct investment to really unleash the kind of transformation we need in the agricultural sector. And again, bearing in mind that we have to do this without condoning the expansive move on the land grab, which as at last year, the total land grabbed in Africa is equivalent to the size of Kenya. So we have to make sure that this is really, really done in a way that really promotes that, and it helps to rub on the technological adoption at the small scale farm holding level. Private sector-led innovative financing, as well as the use of regional value chain in promoting not only agro-allied initiative, but making sure that we share experiences and learn from each other, which I think it's very, very important. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I think we have listened to the three panelists that have been able to really give us the food for thought in terms of what should be the strategic direction that we need to go in using agro-allied industrialization, in denting inequality, and eliminating poverty by 2030. And on the basis of this, I think it's good to really listen to your reflections, comments, feedbacks, questions, and some additional inputs. Please, colleagues, we want to make sure many people intervene and contribute to the process. Please ensure your intervention is very concise, focused, and it goes straight to the issues to be addressed. And on the basis of this, please, you have a maximum of 1 minute, 30 seconds per intervention. Yes. Can I start from my left hand? Any hands up here? Yes. Oh, Professor Abraham. Okay. All right. Can we have the mobile microphone?
Thank you, moderator. Distinguished guys, colleagues. I think the three speakers have actually touched on what key points that one would almost say there's little to add. But a point or one or 2 points that I feel may not have been emphasized enough, even since 2 days ago we started, is the issue of social policy that has to do with, particularly with respect to this inequality we are talking about now. We know that we say we want to target women, and particularly in the rural areas. We know that in rural areas and rural women in particular, we have large families. And if we increase their productivity and the aspect of family control is not built into it, you see that they will continue to have large families and per capita income there continues to be lower. So that continues to widen the inequality we are trying to get to address in the first place. The second point is on this ICT or technology. I want us to avoid creating dual technologies. The younger ones that are coming can easily adapt to new technologies, quite all right. But the older ones, still in the rural areas, who are less adaptive to new technology, how do we ensure that we carry them? Moses said it should take time. I admitted that it should take time to carry them along. While we are doing that, we want to avoid creating dual technologies there, so that we have a newer technology for younger ones in the urban areas and even in the rural areas, but we have the older ones who are still using or are not able to pick up at a fast pace. And then we'll have this inequality thing being perpetuated again. I think I've spoken for 1 minute. I should stop there. Thank you.
Yes. All right.
Yeah, my name is Ondone Diwa, Strategic Resources Limited. I want to comment on one or two things. Now, the area of financing comes in here very, very strategically. We see that at the agricultural revolutions in the Western world, there was a lot of social capital that came into it. It was not strictly commercial capital. Now, but here, due to the dearth of funds, Africa is suffering now, we seem to leave this thing hanging. We talk about it as if, well, this will be financial capital, maybe from the financial sector, but we don't seem to say very, very clearly how this thing can be leveraged in such a way that, like in Nigeria here, there's some effort being done, whereby central bank will give, concessionary, interest rates and all of that. But that is not enough, because the kind of interventions that are needed are huge. Now, so can we think about that? How can that kind of capital that is not strictly speaking, commercial, but then there is some social aspect of it, that kind of leveraging, but it's huge. So how do we go about that? Now, there's the need to also look at the antitrust laws. when you are talking about processors, coming together, maybe to shortchange the small growers, the issue of antitrust laws also come in, because when these people come together, they become cartels, and then they are monopolies, and they can conspire, against the small farmers. And so I think we should also stress the issue of antitrust laws and their enforcement, and the issue of rural infrastructure. Again, it requires huge investment. Can we think a little deeper on how we can propose that this could be achieved, considering the present, financial landscape, globally, and things like that? How can we take advantage, of the huge funds, maybe, that exist in some of, of the, institutional investors, sovereign wealth fund investors, equity, investors, and then leverage it? Because if Africa gets it right, in the rural infrastructure thing, I think the whole world will be the better for it. So how do we go about that? Now, the issue of extension, there is a big problem of extension workers. It is huge. You go to some states and you discover that you have only 100 and something, extension workers serving millions of farmers. So who invests in that? This is government, and so the role of government is so critical. Now, Moses talked about institution. That there should be an institution that should come in, to help in the research and all. There are a lot of institutions now that exist already. How do we optimize on what they are doing now and integrate it into the agricultural, economy of Africa? Thank you very much.
Thank you. The last one on this row. Okay.
My name is Adeyemi Gideon. I'm from Obafemi University in Nigeria. I have two observations and maybe questions. One will be directed at Moses and the other to Hemi. You mentioned land accessibility as a major factor if we are to increase agricultural production in Africa. And I've also observed it before now, even before the conference. And we are talking about agro-allied industrialization here, and there is no way we will do that without first increasing agricultural productivity. And I think if we are going to do that too, one major thing that we should take care of is land accessibility. Now, my point is this. Personally, based on my experience, I want to be sure that I'm not exaggerating the role of land accessibility, and I want to be sure, I've also discussed with some persons, I want to be sure they are not also undermining the place of land accessibility in all of these things. Personally, with my experience, I know that in Nigeria, for instance, there are two means through which you can access land. The formal one is there, and the informal is still very much operating. We have traditional rulers who still hold on to land, and before you can get it through them, sometimes you are duped, and sometimes they don't release the land, and they are not using it. And it is still like that, and it's still very difficult. Personally, I've tried to access land as a young boy before, and it was so difficult. I know of an uncle too who paid a certain amount of money, and for years, through the informal means, and even through the formal too, the bureaucratic bottleneck is still there. I'm only asking here that I see it as a great problem. I want to be sure that I'm not exaggerating it, and I have not seen people talk about it so much, and I've also engaged a few of my colleagues here, and they are saying, I don't see that as a big problem for us in Africa. I want to be sure they are not also underestimating it, so I want you to help me speak on that. And secondly, to Hemi, we have all been recommending how to move Africa forward. There must be policy, there must be rural infrastructure, on and on. And we all put it back to the government. Now, I want you to, please, immediately I saw your role at AGRA, advocate, I was happy. Advocacy, advisor, and the like. I want you to help me reiterate it. What's supposed to be the role of myself and my colleagues as children of farmers, and even the farmers too, in getting the government to do the right thing? Are we just supposed to sit down and hope that maybe a God somewhere will come and change the mind of our government someday? Or we have a special role to play in ensuring that we get them to do the right thing? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll move to this side by the pillar over there.
Thank you very much. My name is Nelson Obela. I work with UNDP. Yeah, I'm actually going to say a story, tell a story from the field. Permit me to use more than 1 minute now. Yeah, I'm working on a UNDP regional initiative called Agri-Business Supply Development Program. In Nigeria, we are focusing on two commodities, rice and cassava. So now, the cassava miracle has actually taken place, and it is happening. What do I mean by this? For a long time, we're talking about making cassava an industrial crop. But now, we have big off-takers who are investing into cassava and producing derivatives that are useful in various industrial and manufacturing sectors. We have off-takers that are producing starch. We have off-takers that are producing ethanol. And we have off-takers that are producing flour for, bakery. So the experience that I have from the field, working with off-takers, we have 3 different off-takers operating 3 different outgrower schemes. And, this speaks to the issue of how empowered or what level of power and influence does the ordinary farmer who is cultivating maybe 2 hectares or less have. Okay, so this is the story. The first off-taker who is producing, I think I should not mention the name. Okay, thank you. So the first off-taker has a robust outgrower scheme. He empowers the farmers, provides all the inputs, provides extension and training, and the farmer farms on his own farm. At the start of the season, they enter into a contract for a price, for the cassava fruits that are to be off-taken from the farmers. So, but, as we've had over the years in Nigeria, particularly with the new scheme that is going on, the anchor borrower, we have farmers who are side selling. Maybe the price agreed on at the beginning of the season maybe shorts up or decreases. Farmers have, the tendency to kind of side sell to anybody coming in to come and buy the products. So that's one case of an outgrower scheme. The second case is a flour producer. This producer engages farmer on their own land. They plow the land, provide the input, monitor everything. So the farmer who is engaged on their land has no, he's not operating on his own personal land, so he cannot go and, kind of uproot his cassava root and sell to anyone else. So the third person now sort of engages the farmers as laborer on the field. So now you have seen the 3 different scenarios. But in the case of the first person who is operating a proper outgrower scheme, the farmers have the right to engage the off-taker when the prices goes beyond the agreed contract. And the woman in case has had several issues where they have to kind of sit back with the farmers to make sure they don't side sell so that they have products for their own processing of starch. So this is a case where you have farmers that are empowered, but their level of power and influence as stakeholders in the supply chain has increased. So one other thing I would like to mention is...
Please summarize. We're moving to the next person.
So one other thing I would like to mention is policies are existing. It's now left for, the major investors to take advantage of the policy. The policy that led to the cassava miracle is the policy of 60% sourcing of your raw material from locally. And that's what has led to the cassava miracle. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next person. Okay, all right. You.
My name is Kelechi Deka. I'm a journalist.
Kelechi. Okay.
My question is to no one in particular, but just to raise an issue. Some years ago, I came back from a NEPAD conference and dropped the papers in the house. And my father came on a visit, and he looked through the whole papers, and he laughed. I said, why are you laughing? He said that 99% of all the issues we are talking about here were raised during the Lagos Plan for Action between 1963 and 1964. And I waited for him to say something else. He didn't say anything. He just kept quiet. And my question is, what are the assurances? Or is there any assurance that in 30 years' time, my sons will not be attending the same conferences, talking about the same issue my father talked about 50 years ago, the same issues I'm talking about now. That's my question. Thank you.
Yes, you? All right.
Raymond from Pregem Concepts. I have a couple of questions.
Sorry, what's your name?
Owa Raymond.
Owa Raymond. Okay.
Yes. I have a couple of questions. First is on fertilizers. Like different speakers have had their turns, and then no one is mentioning, specifying organic or inorganic fertilizers, because some of these implications, it goes a long way to tell on our soil the duration, because some of the problems we have now as a result of either desertification or drought, are occasioned by incessant use of inorganic fertilizers after a long period of time. I think, as a personal opinion, an agri-hub should be created where the farming inputs and outputs equate themselves, where waste from these farm produces are turned into biofertilizers, turned back into some sort of energy for powering either the water for irrigation and so forth. And the second one is there are already existing policies, like everybody here has said, and so that there won't be policy somersault. What are the plans in place to keep this in check, where everybody comes? Because Africa, we respect a lot our sovereignty. What are the plans in place to keep everything in check? And the third is capacity building. How do you incentivize innovative thinking? I think the speakers should just help us touch on these questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Amarkon from UNDP. I want to go back to the remarks made by Chair himself. He mentioned that there are about 6 outliers in terms of inequality in Africa, including South Africa and Angola. Now, my question is, what can we learn from these countries in terms of avoiding getting into that inequality trap by other countries who are not there yet? Is it due to, say, inequality in access to assets, such as land or finance? Or is it due to inequality in access to opportunities, including education, skills development, and jobs? And my second question goes to Professor Moses. You mentioned about high cost of transport or importing goods from South Africa to East Africa compared to, say, for example, from China to Tanzania, for example. Is it due to high cost of production, including high cost of labor, inefficiencies, low productivity, corruption? And also, you briefly mentioned about the logistic issue between Zambia and South Africa. Is it a common, I know it is a problem with other countries also, but is it a problem of, say, monopolistic trading services, including long-haul truck services? I know it is an issue in Tanzania, say, for example. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think, let me now turn. I think you spoke the other time, right? Oh, you didn't speak. Okay. All right.
Thank you. I am Mustafa Said, a final year student of Economics and Development Studies from Federal University Kashiri in Gombe State. I have 2 points to raise at this conference. I felt it is very, very imperative to raise them before I leave, because if I don't, I think I have left a very huge gap. And these points are two. Number one, on Saturday, as I was traveling from Gombe to Abuja, I passed through the Gidanwaya neighborhood and other villages that were surrounded there, and all the houses were locked up. And I was told that it was due to a conflict that resulted from the cattle rearers and the farmers of that neighborhood. So it reminded me that that problem of cattle rearers destroying farmlands in northern Nigeria especially is a very big problem that needs to be addressed very quickly and continuously, because it needs a continuous maintenance, because this is a very big problem. I can remember sometime 2 years ago, because my dad is a farmer. 2 years ago, he had to forgo farming for at least 2 seasons, I think, due to the threat of those cattle rearers. And I knew the potential loss in output that was caused. If my dad could forgo farming because of this cattle rearers destruction, I don't know how many fathers have forgone farming because of that threat. And then secondly, on agricultural technology, I want to make this call. I can remember in many years there were fights against HIV in many ways by all international organizations where campaigns were embarked upon. I want to suggest that the introduction of technology in agriculture should be reiterated through campaigns on the use of technology in farming. I think that will be a very good way of making sure that technology is adopted among local farmers in my country. Thank you for the opportunity. I am Mustafa Said.
Thank you, Mustafa. Now, let me turn to our panelists. We have had questions and as well as some additional clarifications on what we have mentioned. And again, touching on how the concerns from Kelechi, to be sure that we don't pass it into a generational issue, so that the questions that have been asked will not be asked in the next generation, the next 25, 30 years. So, meaning we have to focus on implementation. Just let's try to see how we can really address issues of bottlenecks to implementation of some of the policies we've been having over the past decades. I think that's what we have to do. We may not need to answer all questions, just to clarify some of the things that have been raised. And I'm going to start from Prof.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Let me try and see if I can at least contribute to this issue of avoiding a repeat of what Kelechi experienced between him and his father, and not have him do the same thing between him and his children. Now, yes, Lagos Plan of Action was there, and you all know the tragedy that befell Lagos Plan of Action. At the time it was finalized by the African leadership and it was adopted in Lagos, around the same time, our quote-unquote development partners brought out their own alternative for accelerating development in Africa. It's famously called the Berg Report. That Berg Report fundamentally attacked the philosophy of Lagos Plan of Action. Unfortunately, the African leaders suffered all kinds of dislocations. Many of them lost their positions, but they didn't have control over their own resources to pursue their own program. That was the time, if you all remember, many African countries started running into this debt crisis. Because exactly what we are experiencing now, there was a collapse in commodity prices. That time, soft, commodities, agricultural produce in general, and resource profile of African government became very, dire, and they were therefore at the mercy of the IFIs. If you don't adopt, the IMF, World Bank program, you are going to be, in serious problem even with your own people, because what they need from you, you cannot deliver. So, and in adopting that, the whole program, the Lagos Plan of Action was therefore abandoned. And we ran into the, IMF, World Bank program, which resulted in SAP across the continent. So Kelechi, let us hope that kind of situation does not arise this time around and again disorient us from pursuing our own agenda. There's that risk because the circumstances are quite similar. But what we have not seen as yet is this aggressive push by the IFIs to present an alternative. If we are lucky they don't do so, and we also remain committed to our own agenda, and we return to proper planning, proper development planning in a very rigorous sense, participatory and therefore embedded in it, commitment to implementation. If you're able to do that, I can foresee a situation whereby you will not have to confront your children by saying, look, what you are telling me now in 2030, we actually discussed it in the Lagos Osun room of Transcorp Hotel 2016. I hope that will not be the case. Let us pray. It's a matter of prayer. Now, quickly, the important point raised by Professor Aiboga, social policy, its importance, actually, and the implication for family planning and family sizes. If you invest in education, you invest in health in the rural areas, studies have shown that the higher the level of education of the lady folks, the lower the fertility rate. And we can therefore expect that if we do appropriate investment in the people by actually, focusing on the girl-child education and health, the likelihood is that the drivers of large families will be significantly attenuated. On the health front, many families in the rural areas procreate because they are not sure of the survival rate of children. Now, if through proper maternal and child health programs you can eliminate that risk, that is going to actually reduce the pressure to produce and pray for the survival of the children. Secondly, when the lady folks are more educated, they can then be in better control of their procreation tendencies, and the man will also be more understanding. But more importantly, when you are better educated, you also know the consequences and the cost of having many children, and not just say, well, let me just procreate, God will give them food. You want to procreate and make sure you are in control of the development of your children to your own satisfaction. Once that comes with appropriate education. So I think if we invest in education and health in the rural areas, the way I've just characterized it, then we may escape the challenge of large families and the consequences for poverty and inequality. Let me also, I know my colleagues will take care of the rest, but let me just see if I can talk about a few more. The issue of rural infrastructure. We have been talking about PPP, but what we also need to realize is that no PPP will be pursued in the rural areas. All our PPPs are mega infrastructure programs. Rail lines, big roads, toll gates. Those are the kinds of things that are mainly urban oriented. So government should therefore, use the fiscal space created by very innovative PPP arrangement to continue to advance the mega, infrastructure packages, and use it now to go and address rural infrastructure in addition to the progressive tax, regime I had advocated earlier. Because if you then harvest, resources from the people in the, higher echelons of the value chain, and you combine it with the, fiscal space created by the effective PPP in the mega infrastructure space, you then be able to deal with the problems of rural infrastructure, because that, in my own judgment, is still has to be driven primarily by government, because no PPP arrangement will get involved in, rural infrastructure which cannot be easily financialized. So that's the responsibility of government. So I think that if government sees it that way and effectively put it in their own plan and they implement it, then we shall be bridging the gap between infrastructural divide of rural and urban areas. So, Diwa, that is my own response to your own concern. Let me leave this to my colleagues, and thank you very much for your attention.
Over to you.
Thank you so much. I think I will build on what he said, and then I will touch on two particular questions that were given to me. On the first question of how do we sustain or implement the plans we have already developed, I would add, beyond prayers that my colleague has and hope that my colleague has talked about, I would really want to emphasize that plans, strategies, though they are developed by us and they are supposed to be implemented by everybody else in the society. There will always be shocks. That one will come. But how do you ensure all of us, we are resistant to these shocks? And we are really have ammunition to resist to these shocks. It can only work if everybody, from youth to women or elders in the society to policymakers, if we are committed to implement this. And if there are challenges, gaps, have the courage to challenge them. There is no reason we should be saying amen to foreign policies that are, destroying our economies. I think I'm now bringing back the responsibility to each of us. Let's have the courage to challenge and say no to what we need to say no to. Secondly, on the infrastructure, at least AFDB has just gone. At least I know AFDB has many plans they showed yesterday of building transport infrastructure and the other infrastructure in the rural area, and that's the only way to go. In Rwanda, we have these feeder roads. There are feeder roads, that is true. Big roads are in urban city, but that's the only way to go to help infrastructure being built. Also, we have many PPPs in rural area at district level. For instance, the warehouse, infrastructure in some value chain, they are at district level. So they help to connect different actors in that area. Let me go to the land issue before my colleague touched on it. 2 years ago, before I joined AGRA, my focus on land was the other side of it. I have been challenging land grab for my, activism and so on. I never knew that private sector actually needed land for breeding, for some crops and so on. I needed to go to AGRA to sit with scientists to explain to me, Emim, I think you need to be balanced in what we are saying. So we need land, and the government has the responsibility to provide land for seed production. So we need to know what we are talking about and how we help each other to access. It's a critical issue to not having land, but government have to give opportunity for this. And we can't keep quiet until we get it. We need to fight and fight and fight until we get what we want. So that's what I would say. Fertilizer, yes, organic and inorganic, that's what we are talking about. We are not carrying the other models which will not necessarily work on the African continent. I think we are talking about whatever is environmental friendly, and organic and organic fertilizers is what we are talking about. In any case, we can't even afford to use inorganic fertilizers on the continent. We don't have that capacity, and that's not what we want to do. So I think we are talking about the same thing. There are experts in this area who could bring much knowledge in it. I think that's what I would say. Social policies, I think I touched on this. He touched on that. It's very important. Development, as I said, it's very much linked. There is no way you think of increasing production, but you don't have health insurance, for instance. You don't have people accessing to education. How do you adopt technologies without minimum education? And so on and so on. So it's so much interlinked, and we need to look at it at various levels. Thank you.
Thank you. Moses?
Thank you for your interesting comments. Let me start by asking this question, and I will respond to it. Why do you think inequality is so high in South Africa? despite the strong institutions there. It's a unique economy, and I will explain that and link it to other African countries and how we can reduce inequality. It's very critical. It's a unique economy that harbors two economies in one. You have first economies, more sophisticated skills there. They are producers. The money they earn, they spend it in that economy. Then you have the second economy where you have more poor people. The money they get there, they spend it in this first economy. They are not educated. So what government is trying to do in terms of policies and programs is to narrow the gap between the two, to build a bridge between the first economy and the second economy through programs and policies. But why has it not been working? Because while you're trying to build this bridge, all of a sudden you realize that the second economy is crippled. So after building the bridge, that you needed to give them walking stick to be able to walk. And after doing that, you realize again, I needed to carry these people myself, literally, and put them on top of the bridge, having provided the walking stick for them to be able to walk and close the gap. While you are busy doing this, the first economy, they are busy flying. And by the time you realize yourself, now you need to extend the bridge. So there is it's very difficult. Policies are not streamlined. And if you like, you can borrow the same model and apply it to rural economies and urban economies in African countries. That's exactly what is happening. When you don't have streamlined policies, it's very difficult to narrow inequality. So in South Africa, you have strong institutions, but there is no capacity to manage that strong institutions. In Nigeria, you don't have strong institutions, but you have capacity to manage, but you don't have it. You see, so that is very critical, and that explains why land reform in South Africa has not been successful, because you needed to capacitate the small-scale farmers before you actually give them land. It shouldn't be the issue of grabbing the land for grabbing sake. It should be continuing with the production already going on in that land, having been capacitated to continue using that land productively before you actually hand over the land. Not just grabbing the land and handing it over for handing's sake, but you must prepare the people to be able to use it and make it productive. And I also want to touch on the issue of why it costs less and is and is faster to import soy cake from Argentina to South Africa than from its neighbor. I spoke to that. It's on the issue of poor logistics and infrastructure, industrial infrastructure. That's the transport cost, very high. And you see, while the firms are looking for how to get the input cost very low, so they are looking to import from Argentina because it's cheaper. And take into consideration that you have to face enormous imports, cheap imports coming from China. So on top of that, you have structural constraints, high electricity cost, high labor cost that you have to take into consideration. And on top of that, household income going down, they cannot take part of that cost. The cost must be borne by the firm. So all these things together, we need to build our logistics, our regional infrastructure, very critical to enable our comparative advantage become competitive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, this session has been quite thought-provoking, and it has raised a number of issues. While we started, we said we've been talking about transforming the agricultural system and using it to drive industrialization in Africa. And we said, okay, agro-allied industrialization is a means, not an end in itself. The only way to make it an end is to use it to eliminate poverty and at the same time reduce inequality very substantially in the continent. And on the basis of this, we've talked on a number of issues, particularly ensuring that implementation is number one, implementation is number two, and implementation is number three. meaning we have to really make sure that we focus on implementing some of the existing policies and strategies. Essentially, I always say there's hardly any African country that doesn't have good policies and strategies. But the missing link is the implementation of those policies and strategies. And that's why it's very important for us to really look at what we have and see how we can committedly implement them. And the discussions we've had, our three able panelists, and the interventions from the floor generated what I could call about 10-point agenda. And we need to really reflect on how we can best manage this in order to make sure we use agro-allied industrialization to really reduce poverty by 2030 in Africa. And I just want to touch on a few things so that we note it as we move on. One, we've got to really make sure we reduce middlemen in the value chain process, where more than 70% of the profit emanating from the agricultural sector goes to the middlemen instead of going to the farmers. And that's why it's very important for us to really make sure we invest heavily in bridging the information asymmetry, as was said by Prof. Again, we need to have very solid tax system, progressive tax system, and an efficient and effective public distribution policies for us to really make sure that resources are mobilized from the high-end actors and companies to really direct to the deficit end of the society, especially in the rural area. So we need to really make sure these things are in place. Again, we need to make sure we invest heavily in rural infrastructure. And I mean, some of us, well, there's hardly anybody here that doesn't have a village, even if you are born in Lagos, Johannesburg, Lusaka, and the like. One thing I know is that once you visit your village, you now know that the position you left it about 10, 20, 30 years ago is not where it is today. They are not improving, they are degenerating. And that is the source of our agriculture. So if you don't do that, it's difficult for us to really say we want to transform agriculture. Again, the issue of partnership among the actors at the farm level, the market actors, and the public sector is very critical. We need to have a kind of symbiotic relationship for us to be able to advance the transformation we're talking about, and again, the linkages between agriculture and industry. Productivity is critical. And for us to do this, there are a number of things that have been suggested from the panelists as well as from the floor. And one is the need for us to really expand the extension services and improve the quality of that. Adoption of technology is very important. And at the same time, we need to really make sure that we really empower our farmers to be able to really do what we call the modern agricultural system. Social policies, social capital, and social protection. This is something, again, we need to do. There are some people that may not be able to compete with others. We need to really make sure where private sector cannot really go, because once there's no profit there, the private sector will not go. We need to use social policies to really drive such transformation and development in those areas, especially in the farming communities and rural area. Access to land, access to finance, access to technology. Access is an issue. We need to really make sure this is done. Again, the strategies to transform our small farm holders into medium as well as large scale. I think personally, this is very critical, and we need to really find a way that we have a situation where our small farm holders are quite modernized. We have large spectrum of medium farm scale holders as well as commercial farming. This is the only way we can use this to really transform the industrial development in the continent. Again, we're told that it's very important for us to really use innovative financing, the FDI, local content policies, to make sure that 60% of raw materials you need for your input are sourced locally. This will promote financing the particular sector. Cluster initiative, regional value chains, and avoiding policy somersault, as well as conflict between nomads and farmers. These are critical issues which I call the 10-point agenda we have raised in our discussion. I want to use this opportunity to really thank our three panelists, Professor Oluwa Jakaye, who has given us a kind of what we call wisdom, and we have really drunk from the water that flows from his fountain of wisdom. Thank you very much. And again, I want to thank Amy quite well for giving us the perspective from AGRA, and at the same time, what we need to do to really make sure we strengthen productivity of the agricultural sector to really propel the industrial transformation we are all aiming at. Moses, this is your intervention has been quite innovative as well. It's really good, and it has generated a lot of discussion. I want to use this opportunity to ask the audience to please give them a loud applause. We will go for break now. We need just about 20 minutes for tea break so that we come back here exactly 11 o'clock. Prof, Amy, and Moses, thank you very much. And thanks for your intervention. Thanks for your attention.